all minority identities always ask for representation. But guess what's worse than no representation? It is misrepresentation. And Bollywood has done it again. In today's talk, you will learn 5 things about asexuality, which will make you a better expert at asexuality than Bollywood. Are you ready? Now, you might ask, why should we listen to you and not Bollywood? Let me tell you a little bit about myself. After graduating from medical school and doing a bunch of interesting little projects, I started my first mainstream job with the World Health Organization. But at the same time, I also started something very interesting called Indian ACEs, India's first initiative for asexual groups. Over the next 5 years, I worked tirelessly to bring visibility to this cause in our country. So much so that I gained a number of awards, including a mention in BBC's 100 Women list. Since 2021, I identify mostly as a social entrepreneur, and if all goes well, next year I'm celebrating 10 years of doing this important work in our country. Apart from all of this nerdy stuff, I did a few cool things too. For example, I got a chance to share the stage with a number of Bollywood and Hollywood celebrities, such as my personal favorite, Nandita Das. I also got a chance to have a royal luncheon with the King and Queen of Sweden. Yes, they still have a king and a queen. I also got the chance to do matchmaking. My events are called Platonicity, and some of the matches even got married. I got a chance to travel across the country delivering my exclusive workshops on gender and sexuality completely independently. I also presented my independent research on asexuality at various international conferences and other fora. Believe it or not, that is me. I walked around a prominent mall in Delhi looking like that, dressed like that. I also modeled for an Indian sari brand. Some of you might or might not recognize the pattern on that sari. I gave dozens and dozens of talks across the globe, and I also partied with the most down-to-earth ministers in New Zealand. Most recently, I got a chance to act for a YouTube series for Girl Effect, and I also won the European Commission's Global Hackathon. Now that we all agree that I've done a few cool things, I will tell you the ones that I could not put in pictures. I have also been to jail. I have been a case study for an international conference. I managed to escape watching a single episode of Game of Thrones. I solo traveled to a dozen countries. And the one that I'm most proud of, I got the A added to the LGBTQI in India. I'm hoping that by now you're all convinced that I'm a cool person. And if that's the case, then let's talk serious stuff. In the global history of asexual activism, you will see that even before 2000, there were some mentions of asexuality in Western media. But it was only in 2000 that the first mention of something like a Yahoo mailing group list, which is something that most of you probably don't even know or understand, was formed. By 2002, the first international organization called AVEN was established. And as I was sharing, in 2014, I started Indian ACEs, which I later learned was also South Asia's first initiative on asexuality. In 2021, of course, I've done a lot of other little initiatives. But how did this entire journey begin? Where did it start? It started in 2013, when due to some personal circumstances, I found myself Googling a lot of random things. And one of the words that I stumbled upon was asexuality. Now, this was a word that I had never heard of before. I had heard of the LGBT and more, but not the A. And it made me really, really curious. I was convinced that in a country where there's so much LGBT activism, there has to be something happening on the A as well. There must be somebody. There must be some organization. So I looked and I looked and I looked, only to realize after 6 months that there really was nothing. In fact, if you look at the Google trends of how often this word has been Googled, you'll see that it's only recently that it's really caught on. And that's not a surprise to me now. Because the truth is that in most LGBTQI spectrum work and organizations, there is a hierarchy. Between different identities, there are some that hold more power and more representation. And the first thing that I want you to take away today is that the harsh truth is asexuality is a little more invisible than most other identities. By 2014, and after 6 months of looking and looking and looking, I had, as a byproduct, learned so much about asexuality that it made me really, really fascinated. The subject was of great interest to me. I had also come across so many other asexual people from India looking for other people from the community in, let's say, the French forum or the Spanish forum, because there was nothing in the country. And I thought, is there something I can do about this? And I started something as simple as a Facebook page. Yes, Facebook was happening back then. And so this simple Facebook page called Indian Aces is where I would post memes and everything that I had learned about asexuality and also human sexuality. By now, I knew that what was more important than talking about what asexuality is was talking about what asexuality is not. And so I want to ask you, what comes to your mind when you first think of the word asexuality? Because I'm 99% sure that whatever you think is actually not true. The second thing that I want you to learn is the most fundamental thing about asexuality, is that it's a sexual orientation, characterized by a lack of sexual attraction. So it has little to nothing to do with sexual action, sexual preferences, sexual activity, or sexual desire. Put it in the same category as homosexuality, heterosexuality, and so forth. By 2015, the page Indian Aces had started getting an immense response. And by immense, I do not mean in the number of likes, because everybody and their uncles and aunts would know that they have liked a page called Indian Aces on Facebook. But in the inbox folder of this page, I was getting messages that completely blew my mind. People were telling me the deepest, darkest secrets, things that they had never shared with anybody. And here's the catch. By 2015, nobody even knew who was behind that page. I had not even put my name or my face to it. It was a completely anonymous page, and yet people from across the country were talking to this anonymous person because they had no one else to talk to. And it doesn't surprise me now, because this is a very small minority group. Various studies across the world will show you that only about 1 to 5% of the world's population can be estimated to be on the asexual spectrum. So when they first saw somebody like themselves, even anonymous, potentially a creep, talking about asexuality, they couldn't stop, and they still wanted to talk about it. Now, some of you would rightfully question, if it is such a small minority, why should we care about it? Why does it even matter? Why are we having a TEDx talk about it? Let me ask you this. Can you make a guess how many Indians pay an income tax? It is only a little over 1%. You would also be surprised to know that only the richest 1% of the world own about half of its wealth. Only 1% of the world's population is redheads. Only 1% of people live with autism spectrum disorder. And so maybe this is not such a small number after all. By 2016, it was clear to me that the biggest pain point for the South Asian asexual community was the impending doom of an arranged marriage. And remember, I'm doing all of this out of my goodwill. So here's me sitting and thinking, let me create a Google form. If I can manage to get 10 to 20 people sign up for it, maybe I can match them manually on an Excel sheet. Right? Wrong. Because I made the Google form, and I launched it, and I went to bed. By the time I woke up, I had more than 100 responses in one night from across the globe. The longer I let the form stay online, the more responses it kept getting. And I had to take it down. I realized I cannot do it manually on an Excel sheet after all. The truth is that there are many people in the world who are looking for a non-sexual relationship for a variety of reasons. They're a very hidden minority, but they exist. Of course, over the years, I've started something a little more organized called Platonicity, which is trying to do the same thing, but in a more structured way. But here's what I want you to take away from this. That non-sexual people and non-sexuality is a thing in itself. And it is different from asexuality. Now, if you can remember this, you are an expert on asexuality. This is what separates a novice from an expert. Let me explain how. It's easy to assume that anybody who experiences no sexual attraction would also be a non-sexual person. But that's far from the truth. The truth is it exists more like this. There are many people who are both, but some which are one and not the other. This is the difference between Bollywood and you. Bollywood does not understand this. By 2017, I had done so much work on asexuality, but I was beginning to wonder, do I belong with this community? Is there something common between us? Is this something personal to me? Remember, I told you I had not put a name or a face to it, but in 2017, I finally did. Through a full-page feature on India Today, I finally put a name and a face to the person behind Indian Aces. And this was mostly because I learned that asexuality, much like any other thing to do with humans, for example, our height, exists on a spectrum. Think of a line going from a white to a black. There are 50 or more shades of gray in the middle. And somewhere on there is something called gray sexuality. This is the last thing I want you to take away. Now, the truth is that there's a lot more about asexuality that can be learned. And that's beyond the scope of today's talk. But if you can remember these 5 points, you're well on your way to being better than Bollywood at understanding what asexuality is. For everything else, feel free to contact me later. Thank you.